What's up guys, my name is Dave. Is the microphone on? What's up guys, my name is Dave. I've shot a lot of BJJ highlights in my time and I thought I would share with you guys my rig and how I film the most epic jiu-jitsu highlights in the world. On the internet. I'm gonna make this into like a two-part video. The first one's gonna be like how I film, what kind of equipment I'm using. The second part, I'll go more into the editing. The editing's kind of lengthy in its own. A little bit off topic for those of you guys who already know how to edit. So without further ado, here's my setup. Zhiyun crane gimbal, which is also stacked onto a monopod. The monopod is actually a pretty cheap aluminum monopod. It's a little bit heavy. A lighter one would probably be better because carrying this around, lugging this guy around when you're trying to film for long events is actually, my arms get quite tired. But the point of the monopod is so that I can get a lower shot so I can get the better angle. A better angle for the video camera when I'm shooting guys who are rolling. Zhiyun crane itself, screwed the camera off. I bought this guy like 5 years ago, so when I bought it, it was actually a lot more expensive, but this is actually the older model of the Zhiyun crane. I think I bought it for like $600, but I was looking online today. There's a new and better model, and it's only about 300 bucks. So that's quite a steal, I think. I've been working with this guy. It's been working really well for me with no problems. I've been using it for 5 years, and you know, it's still trucking on. Lastly, I've got the camera. I have two cameras here that I'm working on. I've got my GH4, which is a pretty solid camera. I got it when it was new, so it was expensive when I purchased it, but now these cameras are quite cheap. For this guy, I just wanted a really cheap lens, so I got a little Lumix 14mm fixed lens. Really cheap, really solid video quality for a cheap setup like this. If you guys need a budget setup for your jiu-jitsu highlights, the GH4 and a fixed lens is quite a beast actually. Professional or vlogging setups, I've got my GH5. I mean, just looking at this guy, it's a lot heavier than my GH4, and so usually I'm lugging this guy around on the gimbal, but lately I've just been kind of lazy. I take this guy out on the run and I just leave this guy at the gym. For the purpose of a highlight, it's kind of hard to really tell the difference between a GH4 and a GH5. But you know, if you're running and gunning, which I am for most of my footage outside of highlights, the auto stabilization on the GH5 is amazing. So for the most part, the GH4 just stays attached to the gimbal and stays at the gym. Whereas if I have to shoot something where I'm actually hand holding it, I'm almost always gonna reach for this guy. But it doesn't take an expensive camera to shoot highlights. Actually, you can just use your cell phone. And the good thing about using your cell phone is that the gimbals are even cheaper. There's like $100 models out there. So a lot of options. You don't need the best camera to get the best highlights. But there's two things I want to talk about when you're shooting your highlights to ensure you get the best possible footage before you even start editing your highlights. So I'm gonna lug this guy back on to the gimbal. All right, so this guy's already stabilized. I've got my GH4, turn him on. The thing about the gimbal is that no matter how I move it, the camera is gonna be staying focused without any shakes. The gimbal is really necessary for the GH4 because the GH4 doesn't actually have any in-body stabilization. The GH5 does have in-body stabilization, but even still, when you're carrying a camera, it's a little bit hard to chase the perfect angle. When you're shooting a highlight, like what most people will do, is they'll just like hold a camera at chest height and they'll just shoot down at their subject. But what that does is you've got the guys in the forefront, the action in the forefront, but what's just as important as what's in the forefront when you're shooting a highlight is also what's in the background. So if I'm just like looking down here at our mats, like just imagine that there's like a couple guys here, right? Most of the real estate of the background is actually just the mat right there. And that's makes for a really boring shot. So even if I'm just like panning left and right, yeah, sure, I might be following the guys or whatever, but you can see right here that for the most part, whether I go left or right, it's just like a sea of orange. That's right, our mats here at Jiu-Jitsu Land are orange. So it's not very dynamic. The background footage, really, you just kind of want diversity, right? It's a lot more interesting shot if your background also has a lot of different things to look at. So in order for us to chase this perfect background, right? I got this monopod here. And honestly, you don't need a monopod. I would actually recommend it if you're gonna be shooting for long periods of time. You could just lob the camera around like this. I've been doing jiu-jitsu for a long time. I'm a black belt in jiu-jitsu. So my shoulders and my back and also my knees are not really doing so well. It's possible. Look at this footage right here already. Like if I'm panning to the left and right, like you would imagine that there's gonna be two guys here. And what I like to do is I like to coast the camera so low to the ground that you can just barely see the mat, right? And what's good about this shot here is as you pan left and right, you get all this. That's right, you can see the door now, the ceiling. You can be a little more aware about the environment and what's in the environment. You can see the beautiful ceiling lights that we have here at the gym. You can see our beautiful sign, which you'd be missing out on if you're shooting from a different angle. And you can just keep going left and right. And if you shake, It's just a lot more interesting of a shot, right? When I'm chasing the action, unless the guys are standing, if the guys are standing, I'll usually kind of come like a hip high, like in my waist high, but I can just bring this gimbal up and down as needed. And when the guys hit the ground though, their faces are generally pretty low, so that means I'm gonna be coasting like this and running around like this for extended periods of time. I actually run this gimbal sometimes for like 8 hours. I'll rest my legs like this sometimes, but it really gets to you for a while. So that's where this monopod comes in. You're gonna be filming long events. You need a monopod, right? So that you can kind of have a better posture as you're filming. Plop this guy back on. I actually have a better monopod, but I left it up in Seoul. I gotta go get it. It's a lot lighter. It's like half the weight. But now you can see like I can chase the perfect angle and keep the camera coasting to the ground. I can kind of keep my shoulders rolled back instead of hunching over. I can protect the wear and tear on my spine as well, my lower back. And my knees don't get as stressed out because when I'm going around, I can just kind of walk like this. Monopod's also nice. If I have to chase the angle when some guys are just training, I can also just kind of send the camera first and also chase the camera. So this is my setup. This is how I get all my awesome shots of the highlights at League Royale here at Jiu-Jitsu Land. When we are running our morning class today, when we're running our sparring for the morning class, I'll be shooting a couple of the guys who are sparring. I'll kind of give you guys a breakdown on what it is I'm looking for to try to make the footage as good as possible for when I'm gonna be editing it into a highlight later. I notice a lot of time like when people are filming and they don't really know what they're looking for. First is like, yeah, we have to film in a way that we get an interesting background. But when you're filming your subject, that's two guys who are rolling, for the most part, you want to be chasing the eyes. So if you're like in a scene where you can't see either person's face, it's kind of like a dead shot. And with the gimbal, like if we didn't have the gimbal, like I could be holding this guy around. I could be chasing this guy around, but as I walk with it, you know, it's gonna start getting really shaky and no one really wants to watch shaky footage. It's very difficult to watch shaky footage. So the gimbal allows me to run around with my camera and chase the perfect shot so I can just always have that perfect shot. Here in this shot, you see like a guy is like laying down, and typically when the guy's in guard, I'm usually trying to film from the guy on top's perspective, which means I'm either gonna be shooting directly in front of the guy who's on the top side, the guy who's passing, or I'm gonna be trying to shoot him from like maybe like a 90-degree angle here. So sometimes we get some sideways shots of the guy on top. If you're shooting from the backside of the guy who's passing, typically the shots just don't turn out as good. Plus, if you're seeing the backside of the guy who's passing, you can never really see what his hands are doing. And what a guy's doing with his hands in jiu-jitsu, is also a big part of his strategy, his passing game. It's a big part of the action, what the guy's doing with his hands and not just with his legs. So typically when I'm looking for the best shot, if I can get both guys' faces in, it's better. People just, when you're watching footage, people's faces will tell a story, you know, like if a guy's like grimacing from pain, or if he's like really like, you know, some people make some crazy faces when they're training, and if they're making those crazy faces, you really want to try to capture that because their faces alone tell a story. Faces, eyeballs, and then, you know, as you do it more and more, you kind of get a good feel for what's a good shot and what's not a good shot. But when you have that gimbal, since you have the freedom to walk around, you should always be chasing that perfect shot. We run a group of events, like tournaments, events here in South Korea, like sport jiu-jitsu events. But for me, I like jiu-jitsu as a sport, but I also like jiu-jitsu as like an art form. And for me, the art form is trying to capture the most beautiful jiu-jitsu I can and editing into highlights to make it an expression of art. So I've always really enjoyed filming and trying to make the jiu-jitsu look as interesting as possible. Because come on guys, let's be honest, sometimes when you're watching other people do jiu-jitsu, it's really boring, you know, and it's not really fun to watch. The beauty of a highlight is you can cut really boring jiu-jitsu, make it look super active, make it look really interesting. All right guys, this was a good training session. I'm all showered up, feeling really refreshed from the training, and I'm gonna head out of the gym now. So you guys go out there, film some really awesome highlights. And if you like some of my tips and you make a really good highlight, send me a tag or let me know. Show me what kind of good footage you guys were able to shoot, and keep in touch.